I've been following Coracle for a while. I've seen it obviously on Nostr. A lot of people talking about it, and I've played with the client on the web. But I'd love to sort of back it up and hear a bit of your story. I've read actually you've got tons of great blog posts about this, but I'd love to hear kind of your story just from in your own words. What drew you to Nostr, and sort of what was your journey to get here?
Yeah, so 2020 losing its mind was kind of a turning point for me. Shook me out of a lot of complacency and kind of just coasting beliefs, just having fun with my life, basically. And then in terms of Nostr, the Hunter Biden article at the New York Post was kind of related to the social media side of things for me. I expected that of Facebook, but not really of Twitter. Twitter's whole ethos is openness and
Hmm.
journalism. So that was surprising. I did a deep dive into the decentralized social media landscape, discovered Scuttlebutt, kind of played around with Mastodon, found a few other things, and then, but nothing really was a very good solution. Scuttlebutt was cool, but obviously wouldn't scale. And so I sort of shrugged and just said, hopefully someone solves this. A year later, I took stock again, did another deep dive into the decentralized social media landscape, didn't find anything new. So I said, well, I guess I'm somebody, so I'll fix this problem. So
Yeah.
in January of 2022, I sat down and just decided I'm going to write a decentralized social media protocol. Um, I have a 0% chance of success, and it's a 10-year project. So I'll just get started. And so I worked on that, and then about 2 weeks later, I found Nostr. And it was really similar. Basically, the key insight for both of them was the multi-master setup. So my protocol was more focused just on social media. Nostr, I guess, kind of started that way, but it was a lot looser. And so
When you say multi-master, are you talking about kind of the relay type configuration?
yeah, exactly. So in my protocol, it was kind of, relays were similar to home servers on Mastodon, except you could join multiple ones at the same time, and your
Hmm.
profile was replicated across them. So it was really just like a step between Mastodon and Scuttlebutt. Nothing like Galaxy Brain, but it helped me recognize Nostr for what it was early on, and then
So you kind of had a
I
prepared mind going in.
yeah, but I resisted Nostr for about 10 months until in November I finally threw in the towel. Realized that writing a social media protocol by yourself is an exercise in futility.
Why
So
why did you resist? I'm curious. Were you just wanting to have a different style or something that you'd sort of originated, or was there something else that you just didn't like the direction it felt like it was going?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I looked at it and it seemed really incomplete, right? And I think I realize now that that was by design. The main thing I was looking for was sort of rules about content replication across relays. So if I have a friend, so if I'm on relay A and B, and I have a friend who's on B and C, um, C should replicate the content from A that my friend on B is interested in.
Hmm.
So if he sees something from me and he reacts positively to it, um, that content should get carried over to C, and then kind of propagate through the social graph that way. So servers kind of formed a much more central role in that in my architecture.
Hmm.
Same basic architecture, but the orientation, the emphasis was different.
So the servers
Um,
would talk to each other to coordinate where the content was?
Yeah, and it was based on a pull model. So right now servers can push events to other relays, and I think that's a problem. I don't want my relay flooded with stuff that users who are on my relay aren't directly providing.
Hmm.
I'd like my relay to be idiosyncratic. And ultimately, I hope that's where Nostr ends up. Who knows? It's way too early to say whether that'll actually happen. But
What is it that makes you want it to be idiosyncratic?
Well, so it's kind of the scaling problem. So as the amount of content on Nostr grows, if it's not partitioned across relays based on some heuristic, you end up with either a random collection of content on a small relay or all the content on a single relay. So that has centralizing effects. That has a lot of kind of performance problems. A friend of mine used to work at Twitter, and he at a dinner party one time, he gave me a rundown of what Twitter's caching architecture looks like. That's how good of a dinner guest we are, you know. And Twitter's basically all edge caches, right?
Hmm.
I post something, it goes into let's see, it goes into uh, a write. I think it goes into a write queue, and then gets basically just directly replicated to the edge caches, the read queues for all of everyone who follows me, because no one cares about me, right? But when like Donald Trump or Elon Musk or something tweets, that gets well, maybe I'm getting this wrong. That gets aggressively pushed to all these like central edge caches, or like yeah, I'm butchering it, but it gets much more aggressively pushed to all the different places.
Hmm.
So it's more highly replicated. Whereas I guess maybe it's a smaller someone with fewer followers. Just puts it in one spot, and then their followers can actually dereference that. So it's all about latency and batching and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And with a decentralized architecture, you just can't do that optimization on the fly. You can't spin up a bunch of services because there's no coordination between members of the network. So keeping the relays idiosyncratic means that you have to do less propagation of content or dereferencing of URLs across the network. And then, to facilitate that in my protocol, there was a scheme for basically proving the path that an event has taken. So if I share my event with a relay, instead of just having a signature on that, I would have an array with one signature, and then that relay would then sign that event and put that second signature into that array of signatures, and so on through propagation. And so relays down the road could say like, well, there's four signatures in this. That's too many hops. I'm not going to accept this note. And then when you publish something to a relay, you would then sign the request as well. And the relay would say, okay, is the person signing the challenge the same as the person who signed the last entry in this event? If not, I'm
Hmm.
going to throw it away. So it gave relays the tools to defend themselves against spam,
I see.
or if not spam, then at least replication of content through the network. So I think that's still an interesting idea. I think we could potentially learn from that. I'm also not sure if that scheme would even work. There might be holes in it. But yeah, that was one of the main things. That and moderation. So I reached out to Fiat Jeff back in like March of last year and was like, how is moderation going to work? Are you going to have shared mute lists? Or are you going to have shared, are you going to do content recommendations through shared like events or something like that? And it was just like, don't really have a story for that. Uh,
Right.
and so that was why I stayed away for a while. But people have been talking about that since then. People are talking about that on the GitHub repository. There's some nips in place that people are hashing through these things. So I really am excited about Nostr. I think it's because it's a much more open, flexible, evolving protocol. All of these problems are going to get solved one way or another in a way that a top-down architecture perspective or approach couldn't do. They might be a little uglier
Hmm.
ultimately, but
Yep.
the bottom-up approach is really attractive to me.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend earlier today and kind of trying to explain to him about Nostr and why I think it's interesting. And one of the things I was mentioning was that, just like on the web, like HTTP and, is sort of designed around bringing in documents, but it's not really designed around having web apps or having like session state and all these cookies and e-commerce sites. We've just stuffed a bunch of stuff into this idea of a document because like we want apps and we've all agreed on HTTP. And I feel like that's kind of there's an analogy somewhere for Nostr. It's like it's just signed messages on relays, and then everything else you have to sort of build around that core idea. But you mentioned kind of around the relays having a bit of, I guess, like a purpose to them more than just kind of being maybe as dumb as they were initially proposed, or at least as they're kind of currently happening today. And I wonder if that's, do you have in mind that that would be both for read and for write, or do you think it's like everybody would be writing around a certain topic at a certain relay, but then anybody who's interested in that could read from it? Or how do you think about the dynamics there?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of different ways you can put that together. So you've got public write, public read. You have public write private, well, public write, private read doesn't make any sense. Um, although, yeah, no, I don't think that makes any sense.
Mhm.
And then you've got uh, uh, private write, public read, and then you've private read. And so, the use cases I see for those things, there's probably lots more examples than I can think of, but like publishers, right? So you have a magazine, and in your magazine on your website you have a relay URL, and you just say subscribe to our relay and look at the global feed to see our zine or whatever.
Mm.
And that would be obviously private write, public read, and that could be done kind of on the fly by certain contributors who just publish their notes to that relay, or publish certain notes to that relay, or long form content to that relay. Or it could be done in sort of a aggregated way, so private write, public read, but with no actual writers. So it's a relay that's backed by some kind of aggregator. So the aggregator goes around and says, I want this content, I want that
Hmm.
content, and then it copies it to its relay and then serves it. And so you get, that's a potential path to curation without any
Hmm.
recommendation algorithm. You just say, what is this entity interested in? There's currently a NIP in kind of proposal state about proposing recommendations using a pub key, and kind of brokering on the fly recommendations using relays as a broker. I'm not really sure what I think about that. It's definitely a different approach than I had considered. Maybe more flexible,
Hmm.
but a lot more overhead. So relays can also be dynamic too. I think Nostr.wine has played around with this, where you just add like the some UUID at the end of your relay URL, and a maybe question mark broadcast equals true, and there you go. You have a virtual private relay,
Hmm.
and those are disposable basically. And then so for private read, private write, that's a case for communities that are closed. And I think there's a strong argument for implementing groups this way.
Hmm.
Group membership is super hard to do in a decentralized way.
Right.
Everyone I've ever talked to, I ask, like, what is uh, how can we do cryptographic groups with key rotation and ratcheting, forward secrecy, future secrecy, all that good stuff. And it's
Yep.
like, who knows? I guess Signal has mostly figured that out. But I think there's weaker guarantees for groups on Signal even
Right.
than for direct message chats. I have a friend who was at the fellowship that I just finished up in
Hmm.
Austin, who is working kind of just for fun on a group chat application. And the way that he handles that is he doesn't even do any encryption. He signs messages, but he has a private peer-to-peer network that is created between participants. And the way he handles privacy is he just doesn't broadcast messages to the wrong people, which is it was a novel idea for me, that you can just you don't need encryption in order to actually achieve that. And
Hmm.
so the fully private relays are one way to accomplish that. It's a little bit more of a blunt force instrument than his implementation was,
Hmm.
but if I have like my five friends, my five close friends, we can just write whatever we want to this relay and read with impunity, because our pub keys are whitelisted on the relays software.
Hmm.
Um, of course, the danger there is that some client that you're using will end up reading that and then republishing it to other
Right.
relays.
Right.
So I'm not sure how you would solve that necessarily. One idea I had is that this private relay, well, it's trusted, right? So we can increase the trust, decrease
Yep.
the interoperability, because we don't want interoperability. And so that relay could essentially just strip the signature field off of all the events, and
Hmm.
then the clients would not validate the events, and then the clients, when they if they try to republish them to other relays, the relays would reject them. So
Right.
that's the best idea I've come up with for the full to really like support the full private use case. But
Yep.
yeah.
That's cool. And then, if we sort of zoom out from the relay stuff and just talk a bit about Coracle, like I understand that you were working on kind of a protocol that may have been sort of similar in some ways to Nostr, and then you finally sort of got on board with Nostr and decided to start building Coracle. So I wonder, what you were pretty early from what I understand with on Brandly, and you were playing with other clients. What were you sort of setting out to do? Sort of what was the goal of Coracle when you were starting that?
Yeah, well, the kind of blunt force goal was fix Twitter.
Hmm.
It's refined since then. I've thought about what social media should look like and what's useful to people. I just think about the people that I know, right? So I have a really strong church community. There's like 1,500, 2,000 people in it in my location, and we do a lot of commerce with each other, but also with other local people.
Hmm.
And like, what are the use cases that people use Facebook for? Because normal people use Facebook, weirdos use Twitter.
Right.
So I'm one of the few weirdos in my community that actually uses Twitter. And Facebook is basically boiled down to groups, events, and marketplaces.
Yep.
So if you can get to the point where you can have a private group where you share pictures of your kids or coordinate vacations, and then events that are invite only and private, that you can coordinate, events like just camping, bonfires, whatever,
Yep.
and you can buy and sell with people you trust, like who you're not afraid to go to their house and pick something up off of their porch, uh, and with people you don't trust who you'd rather meet in a Walmart parking lot. I think having something like that, that's table stakes for normal people.
Yep.
So that's what I want to see happen. I'm
Right.
not going to build all of that, uh, but I'm glad people are
But
already working on marketplaces.
yeah, I mean that's an interesting perspective because I think a lot of people who are approaching Nostr today are looking at kind of the broadcast, Twitter like use case, and I think it sounds like some of that was exciting and interesting to you and what drew you in, but it sounds like you're very focused on these like more community and local use cases that I would say are, maybe you're kind of saying more replacement for Facebook than replacement for Twitter in some ways. Is that kind of what your motivation or goals are?
Yeah, that's what I've kind of come to. I wouldn't say focus is a very good word, but
Okay.
the hype on Nostr is insane. Every week there's some other thing that you have to implement in order to keep up with everyone else. It's slowed down a lot. It's only every 2 weeks now, so you know.
Get a breather.
But
But
yeah,
when you think about like a Facebook crowd today might be seeking even simpler UXs and kind of more kind of hand holding than maybe people who would be early to adopt something like a Twitter, right? I feel like Twitter for its whole life has always been a little bit of a stranger place for people to kind of get their heads around versus Facebook's like very easy and accessible and kind of feels like a place that people can get into easily. So I wonder like how do you if you're sort of addressing what may be a different audience or different use cases, do you sort of think about ways to simplify the UX, different ways to simplify maybe onboarding and to help people connect to these communities, or maybe do you talk about the key management early, or do you sort of defer that to later? How do you sort of think about, all of these kind of, the cypherpunk ideals, but applied to, anybody, kind of your neighbor next door?
yeah, that's a super good question. I don't know if I have much of an answer, to be honest. I mean, you're right about what Twitter is like. It took me like 10 years to wrap my head around threads. Twitter's just very weird. I mostly didn't tweet for a long, long time. Um, and of course, Facebook, by comparison with anything else, is a total disaster. Notifications are broken. I've been using it for like marketing stuff at my day job, and their whole business suite is broken. So it's kind of nice to be competing against Facebook, even as ambitious as it is. I'm not sure Coracle is going to be a Facebook replacement. My goal with Coracle was mostly to figure out what the heck relays are and how to deal
Mm,
with them.
yep.
And I've made some progress on that. I'm not super satisfied that I've found the solution, but that kind of sliding overlay thing. The way I think about relays is as layers in a Photoshop document. So you've
Hmm.
got 10 layers, and they've got different elements in each of them. And you can either isolate one layer and see what is there, or you can flatten the whole thing and see the entire picture. So with Nostr, you select your 10 relays or whatever it is, and there's the flattened picture on your feed. But if you click on one of the little dots, it separates it out, and you can see, oh, like these three posts are here, or And this is useful. It's not very useful right now, but it's useful because ultimately, if relays start to differentiate based on topics or a use case or community, then you can say like, what do my like Marlon Brando fans, to borrow a Fiat
Right.
Jack original, have to
Mhm.
say about this
Was that his
particular?
example?
Yeah, yeah. He cites Marlon Brando a lot, and then I think in the relay, he has a bounty for implement relay browsing somehow,
Hmm.
and in that he refers to the Beatles.
I
So
see.
you know, what does the Marlon Brando community think about the Beatles?
Right.
Uh,
Well, I mean,
how do
yeah,
you answer the question?
the whole idea of relays surfacing to users and kind of being more visible is super interesting because, one way to think about relays is just kind of infrastructure that helps support the avoidance of suppression of speech. But if you start bubbling it up into the interface, you sort of have to have some sort of analogy or kind of mental model to explain to people why you're surfacing this infrastructure piece.
Yeah,
And you mentioned a little bit like maybe within a note you might show which relay it came from, but how do you think you would try to explain to people what that means? Is it like a server from Discord, or is it, do we have other analogies that we've seen bubble up in this way that could be useful here?
I think subreddits on Reddit is a pretty promising
Mm,
analogy to bridge over. Obviously, that doesn't cover everything, so it's somewhere between a subreddit, a Telegram channel, and like a Discord channel.
hmm.
Um, so yeah, because it's a hybrid of a whole bunch of different things, and relays could potentially differentiate into even more use cases. So like it's a private group. That's an entirely different thing. That's one thing I'm excited about with Nostr being a protocol is you can build all these different apps on top of it
Yep.
and you reuse the same primitives to support different use cases. So I don't know where that's going to go, but relays, yeah, is definitely a huge hurdle for new users. I think for new users, it's relays, public private key, identity, and search. So search is like a relatively easy one, but that's actually been the biggest hang up. On my onboarding flow, I have like an intro video. I say, we're going to generate a key for you. Tell us your name, pick some relays, choose some people to follow, and send your first note. And there's a little explanation on each of those. So people kind of make it through. But then the first thing they do, it drops them on the feed and they're following a couple people. So it's like, great. The first thing every person I've tested this with does is click on the search button. And
Mm,
then they type someone's name, someone's real name, into the search bar and
right.
nothing comes up.
Right.
And like, so how do you get past that? I like what, can't remember what it's called, but it showed up really early on in, I think, December. The service that lets you add all of your Twitter, or like verify your Twitter account, and I think add some of your contacts
Hmm.
who have verified their Twitter accounts.
Oh, is this
So
Nostr.directory?
yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So
Yep.
piggybacking on stuff in order to build that initial social graph is
Hmm.
helpful. And then also in a couple different clients, including Coracle, there's the QR codes. And I think what would be really cool is to have another of those QR codes that has like a request to say, would you like to auto follow this person's entire follow list? And
Hmm.
so, I onboard my wife and she can immediately be just all the way into Nostr, or maybe like choose a list to say
Yep.
like this is my newbie list. These are the friends that I follow that this person might also be interested in following, and that way, when I invite someone, they're not automatically following all the Nostr devs because they don't care,
Right. Right. Right.
but they would be following all of
Have
our mutual friends
Have you seen that
basically.
project? I think it's called Lister.lol.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Just, I think it just came about. Like,
Oh
I
yeah,
want to say Jeff put it out there.
yeah, I remember that. It came out about I think about the same time that I added lists to Coracle. So
Oh,
there was
cool.
that was one of those weeks was lists,
Yeah. Yeah.
and everyone's forgotten about that now. But
Uh-huh. Well, because that seems like that seems like a promising way to get this user flow that you're talking about, where people arrive, they go to the search box and they try to search for somebody's real name. And my guess is mostly they're just not finding any of the people that they're looking for, which is like reasonable for an early thing. But if lists can help guide them to areas where everybody is already gathering, maybe you can maybe you mentioned like you're a member of is it 1,500 person church?
Yeah, yeah,
So if you had even a dozen people from that church who all knew each other showing up on a list with the name of the church, presumably it would be really easy to know that that's a good list to show and then get at least a dozen people connected. And I think once you get the ball rolling, then, finding more and more is kind of easier.
yeah,
Everybody
totally.
else who shows up already sees the activity hub.
The ability to follow things other than individual people, follow lists, follow topics. Right now, pet names is people oriented, but I don't see why a client couldn't just start throwing other tags into pet names, and then clients that support non-people pet names would be able to dereference event IDs and auto follow people based on a dynamic list maintained by someone else potentially.
Yep.
Yeah. Although I guess, well, yeah, if you reference an event ID, that would be one in that's uh that's in a point in time, right? So you'd want to do the D tag, but then you don't know the pub key. I'm not sure how you would solve that. There's that addresses nip, but I've never read it, so maybe it's time to finally read it.
You mentioned a nip to me in our DMs, which I didn't even know is a real one. Is it 95?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah, that
so
one's
new that like I went on the GitHub and it's not even there yet? It ends at 94.
yeah, it's
So
it's
what is
been
95?
it's been in purgatory for I think months at this point.
Hmm.
It's the one that's pretty well. It's pretty controversial because it adds image uploads to Nostr,
Hmm.
so it allows relays to actually host images, and the pushback against it is that the implementation details that are specified right now are kind of messy, but also asking relays to store large files in addition to a bunch of small text content, it's like a whole different thing from a technical perspective. You have to spin up a whole different infrastructure in order to support that. I personally think the idea is great. The novel thing about Nostr is the relay architecture, which provides just particular database style characteristics and censorship resistant characteristics. So applying that to files, I think is probably more important than applying it to tweets. Um, so at some point we should do this. Maybe it'll be a separate protocol, but since we have the topology and the infrastructure and the hype and everything on Nostr, I don't see why we shouldn't go ahead and do this.
Would
Um,
that be like a different type of a server, like a middleware layer independent of relays that would be kind of media servers?
in this NIP, it's not. It's just relays, but it
Okay.
could be. I have a NIP that I proposed, and mostly people are not excited about it. But uh, it basically proposes a routing layer to in the Nostr protocol, and that would be done by relays. So relays would know about these extensions. So rather maybe than storing your files on a relay directly, you would store your files on some service that you discovered through the relays that you subscribe to. So you'd basically say, "Hey relays, where should I store my files?" And you get three different answers across 10 different relays, and you can choose one of those at random, or you can choose all three at the same time, and then you upload your files, and then do a NIP94 to tell all the relays about the file that you uploaded. Um, uh, so yeah, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought,
And we're
but
just thinking about how file storage works. I think I've seen some mention about also considering BitTorrent like approaches to files, and I wonder if you've explored that and dismissed it, or if the community's dismissed it, or if that's still kind of an active exploration or one of the proposals for how to do file storage.
yeah, I don't know that much about torrents. I know Fiat Jeff mentioned web torrents a while ago, but then I saw that he was dishing on torrents in the podcast with NVK recently. So it sounds like it's another kind of matter of latency and discovery. You're not necessarily going to find what you want if it's a file that is not commonly requested, right? Because that's how torrents work. So
Hmm.
if I want to share the picture of my kid, who's going to seed that for me?
Right.
I have to be online and seeding it in order for anyone to find it. And they have to ask me, I think, in the first place in order to discover it. So I don't think it's really workable for, memes and one-off things.
Right. But kind of the nip that was it 94, 95 when you were
95. Yeah.
95, that would actually push it out to say three different relays or three different media servers that would host it. So would every media item be kind of like you'd kind of use that same redundancy and hosting and the availability optimization?
Yeah, exactly. You would replicate the content, so it would be even more expensive in terms of storage costs. But yeah, you would not be able to take down a file nearly as easily.
Right, right. And do you think that the media servers, I guess they would have like much bigger kind of storage and bandwidth kind of hosting costs relative
Yeah,
to, say, nodes? So
yeah.
do you think they
Like
would end up having, are there other risks or they have kind of similar risks, in terms of hosting content that maybe in a jurisdiction is not, uh, not approved, let's say?
Yeah, I think in theory they have the same risks, but in practice it would be a lot harder. I run a little image server, and just for supporting Coracle use case, and it's I manually moderate it every so often,
Mm-hmm.
and I've only had to remove like 3 images. People are mostly obey what I request, but it's not very fun to moderate even
Yeah.
that small of a volume. At some point, I want to do AI powered image classification to lighten
Mm-hmm.
the load a little bit, but it's not my bread and butter. So I might just jump over to Nostr build or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So meaning you'd within Coracle you would push people to have their media hosted on Nostr.build?
I would take care of that for them.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's a centralization vector. Anytime a client makes a decision on behalf of a user, it's less power that the user gets to wield. In this case, I think it's worth it for the user experience.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, since I use a custom server, I've open sourced the server that accepts the images, and it's really easy to self-host. So if you really want your image to be censorship resistant, you can put it on your own server, and it's integrated with Coracle. You can go to settings and just enter a different dufflepud URL, and then you have full control. So
Mm-hmm. How do you feel? Because you're sort of touching on a point here around, choices that as a client developer you might make that are defaults for a user that may have some centralization aspect. Do you feel like you generally take a pretty hard line on, fully decentralized, no risks there, or it sounds like you may sometimes compromise decentralization for some UX within your client, which again, of course, is the ecosystem doesn't necessarily create that kind of risk, but for a given client, are you kind of more accepting of some of the trade-offs there?
yeah, kind of the main orientation of Coracle is to explore Nostr and see if it's feasible. And so I try to avoid trading off decentralization as much as I possibly can. I have a swappable image server that's centralized and hosted. I have a hard coded relay that is added to the relay selection when you try to load a profile. So Pablo's purple pages.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use rbr.io to implement counts, like follow counts.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the three places where I trade off decentralization, and they're like really minor use cases.
Yep.
And I hope that eventually the the ecosystem will catch up to those things. Those are not things that need to be centralized. It's
Right.
just I wanted to provide the oh, and I have a search server hard coded. I think I use Nostr.band for search as
Oh,
well.
cool. Yeah, with Archer.
But they're simple use cases. It's not that hard to remove them later when there's wider support for those features. But I'd like to see wider support.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm like a weirdo here because I definitely, love and appreciate the fact that the foundation is very pure and decentralized. But I'm also kind of always like, can't we compromise a little bit on one client to try one exploration path that doesn't really keep users captured, but helps maybe people onboard better? Because I feel like maybe some of the bigger risk is people don't get connected to the right people, like you mentioned with the search. And if you don't get connected to the right people, it's hard to have a great experience. If you don't have a great experience, you're going to abandon. If you don't have enough people kind of feeling welcome and connected at the party, then they won't ever really get to experience what this kind of freedom is like. So I think everybody has sort of a different perspective on that, but I'm always sort of encouraging people because I don't think the end result of this is everything turns back into Twitter. I think the end result is if one client is behaving badly, you can take your your followers and contacts and go to another client. So, but I wonder, like, does that sound like a, I don't know, how does that sound to your ear, given what you've sort of seen and heard from everybody? Is that a really crazy position to take, or does that sound like something that people whisper about?
I think that's the realist position. That's just what's going to happen. And, there are so many ways that decentralization can fail, whether it's latency or a lack of coordination, discoverability. Yeah, like decentralization is super hard. And so I think at the beginning, we need to be pretty principled about investing basically the research in order to discover the solutions for that. What I really like to see, and hopefully all the Bitcoiners, I'm a Bitcoiner, don't cancel me, is to get old Ethereum, like hardcore Ethereum developers on board. I don't know anything about Ethereum because I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I have a pure soul. Uh,
Mhm.
but a lot of people dabbled with Ethereum, and I have a friend of
Yeah.
mine who told me about how they used to build dApps, and there was this routing layer where you would discover the services that you want to connect to, and then you would then connect to those services. And because of performance reasons, all the client devs just connected directly to the services that they wanted to talk to, and so everything's centralized in a bunch
Yep.
of in just a couple of those central services. So having someone who suffered through learning those lessons
Right.
help us out would be awesome. But at this point, the only thing I can say is basically we need to try harder.
Mhm.
And I know like Will Kassarin has said this a lot. Like we need to fight for decentralization. It's not going to be easy until the incentives are aligned and the solutions are discovered. Like I don't mind that things like Primal exist,
Mhm.
um, but I it's not really what I'm interested in seeing. Um, and there is the risk that larger clients. So centralization uh, has a lot of benefits in terms of user experience, and even if it's a higher cost to run something like that. And so onboarding people onto the best feeling clients results in a high lock-in. So it's a very sticky place.
Mm.
People aren't mostly going to switch their clients to go somewhere else out of principle, just like they wouldn't join the network out of principle. And so you end up with a really nice client with a huge market share,
Mm.
and that kind of gets you into the browser wars situation where if Google Chrome adds a feature that's part of the internet now,
Right.
and everyone has to follow. So yeah, I think we're going to have lots of browser wars dynamics. I'm not actually super optimistic about Nostr succeeding in as pure decentralization terms as we're talking about. I think it's ultimately going to turn out to be more of a interoperability layer for the internet, which is great. And of course, it'll still support decentralized social media if that's what people actually want.
Mhm.
But we have to work really hard in order to actually achieve the vision that everyone's really excited about right now.
Right. Do you think there are like natural, maybe technology layers that could be built or should be built that may have some of those, they appear to be centralizing aspects, but they may actually be, as long as they're switchable, maybe they aren't problematic. So, like, I think algorithms is one that comes up a lot. Like, if, in a sense, the evil of the algorithm is when you don't control which algorithm you use, but if you have like, a whole ton of competition among algorithms and transparency and what they do, and you can just pick your favorite, then it has some centralizing function that you're offered it in some sort of selection process. But the algorithm itself is still under your control, and if it's ever behaving badly or just not doing what you want, you can always swap it out to something else. So how do you feel about sort of algorithms within that?
Yeah, I think the argument that this thing is swappable and so it's not a centralizing factor is a cop out.
Mm.
I think there's truth to it, but again, like users are almost entirely concerned about convenience over any other consideration. So if anything is inconvenient, they're not going to do it. Whether that's swapping a service, using a different client, it's basically the same thing. And so if we've got these defaults and users are onboarded there, they're just going to stay there.
Hmm.
Where I do think that argument holds water is if relays have that kind of routing function, relay operators are going to be much more interested in maintaining the decentralization of the network than end users are going to be, and they're going to know how to do it. So if a relay operator is performing a routing function for 100,000 or a million users, they can change the search engine, say that they recommend or
Hmm.
that they use to fulfill their requests. And maybe there's like 1,000 relays, and maybe there's three search engines,
Right.
right? Because a search engine is going to require full text search. It's going to require a bigger database of events.
Yep.
So they're going to be more expensive to run. These little tiny relays can basically vote for a search engine and say, hey, this one is censoring. So they'll say, I'm going to choose search engine B instead. And then, all the relay operators, they're always in groups together. So that message is going to spread very quickly through that like small social network.
Hmm.
Maybe they all are members of a single relay runner relay. Um,
Hmm.
and then, everyone leaves relay search provider A and moves to B or C. It's kind of like how Bitcoin miner pools work,
Hmm.
right? Some like Slush Pool, I guess, has a huge market share, and so that's sort of concerning for the centralization of Bitcoin. But it's not really that big of a thing because miners can switch pools in a matter of minutes. So if Slush Pool starts acting in a way that is not consistent with the miner's interests or the network's interests, there's plenty of watchdogs out there that'll tweet about it, and Slush Pool lose 30% of its hash power in a day. So that's kind of how I see the swapping argument working. Is
I see.
operators have to have that choice. So that routing layer sort of facilitates that.
In the routing, just to make sure I understand, the routing is routing of notes from maybe a large publisher to the audience of that publisher, like to get to the other relays that where the audience might be reading.
Let's see. No, it's more of a matter of recommendations. So routing in terms of like DNS, right? So if I ask my browser for google.com, my computer will go to the DNS servers that I've configured and say,
Hmm.
where is google.com? Well, I can change those DNS servers to my own server that I run, and then
Yep.
my server can tell my browser, actually, google.com is on your computer. And then
Yep.
my computer can try to fulfill the request and fail horribly.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the routing function that I mean when a client wants to search for something. Ideally it would not know any search providers. It would go to all the relays that its user has configured and say, "Where do you think I should search?" And the
Oh,
relays
I see.
can kind of vote and say, "Over here" or "over here," and then the client can sort of decide which one to go for.
So the routing layer is kind of routing from a relay to a kind of a suggested service. Maybe it's a search service or an algorithm or anything else, but kind of you're empowering, I guess, the relays to make that decision instead of the clients.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do because relays are naturally the nexus of trust because trust is distributed across relays. Like the whole inside of Nostr is that having multiple relays that you send your data to takes power away from the relay. So if you send it to
Yep.
two relays, they each one has 50% of the power. If you send it to 10, each one has 10%. It's probably not actually like that. It's probably logarithmic or something like that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
you get the point. Uh, so our trust is fragmented across these different service providers. And so it doesn't make sense to re-centralize our trust in a search indexer that then tells you where the relays are to get the content. Turn
Hmm.
that around, ask the relays, and then they'll tell you where to search.
I see. Right. And as long as you've got a bunch of different relays who are all competing to try to give you the best answer, presumably you'll configure them on or configure them off depending on who's kind of behaving consistent with your ideals or your viewpoint.
Yeah, that and then also potentially relevance, right? So if I ask my private read, private write, church community relay, where should I search for information? Hopefully they've configured a search index that knows about their private notes, right?
Hmm.
It wouldn't make sense to say, yeah, use this giant provider, but they don't have access to the content that I'm even looking for. So
Right, right. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I could imagine a ton of different ways that this works because I haven't thought that much about the relays being such influential recommenders. I had imagined a lot more, I guess, different client styles than we have today. So usually, you think about Twitter, there's sort of two algorithms, I guess, right? There's like the whatever trending and chronological. But I could imagine that you could have like 10 different ones there, or an infinite number of different ones you could plug in there, and that becomes kind of like your app store for algorithms. And you can make them sticky or reprioritize them however you want. But it sounds like your concern with that approach would be that the defaults would be just too commonly accepted, or people wouldn't explore enough to try to figure out different ones they might choose.
Possibly. I think recommendation algorithms might be an exception to what I'm talking about. Search is pretty dumb. Image hosting is pretty dumb, but recommendations is a lot more opinionated, and users are going to be more opinionated about which ones they choose. So having a relay recommend an algorithm for recommending content actually makes a lot less sense to me. Recommendation algorithms should probably be a lot closer to the client, since the how well it succeeds at its function is not a function of like the relay. It's based on what the user is looking for. So yeah, I think recommendation algorithms are actually fine to build into clients.
I see. So yeah, maybe it depends on which. Some things live at the relay, some things live at the client, or maybe there's sort of different mixes that could emerge.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wanted to talk a bit about kind of the Coracle future, because I think we talked a little bit about how you had this. Was it kind of like a fellowship that you were working on Coracle full time? Was it in Austin?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to like pick up where we left off
Yeah.
an hour ago or something like
Yeah.
that. In November over Thanksgiving break, I just took the week off and coded up a first version of Coracle. You can see it at, I think, well, I can't remember. It's like v1.coracle.social maybe. It's basically just a global feed
Mhm.
with some settings. And then soon after that, Jack Dorsey tweeted about it. At the end of December, I applied to FUTO, FUTO. It doesn't stand for anything. It's just four letters that sound good together.
Mhm.
And they actually got back to me in January, and they said, "Yeah, come on down to Austin and work on this for 3 months." They gave me $20,000 and said, "Are you up for moving to Austin?" And I said, "Sure." So with 10 days notice, I took my wife and four kids to
Wow,
Austin. It's a
that's
1,900
bold.
mile drive. It was awesome. It was a
Amazing.
super fun time.
And there's a really strong Bitcoiner community there, so I bet you already knew some people in town.
Yeah, kind of. I didn't succeed super well at getting plugged in with the Bitcoin community. The FUTO is like pretty aligned in terms of values, but is a separate community across town. So I got over to the Bitcoin Commons a couple of times. I went over to the Pleb Lab a couple of
Hmm.
times. So I met a bunch of people, but yeah, I didn't spend a whole bunch of time there, unfortunately.
And are the rest of the people in Futo, were they also working on Nostr related stuff or other kind of freedom technologies as a general idea?
Yeah, Freedom Technologies is a good way to put it. They want to break down the walled gardens basically. So they've got like a video watching app that lets you select existing video apps as a backend. So you can watch from YouTube or Rumble or Odyssey, but from the same app.
Hmm.
And then there's actually a protocol someone's working on that's really similar to Nostr, except it's better engineered. Sorry, everyone. It's called Polycentric. Um, it's really nice. He uses like vector clocks to handle write conflicts. It's just got less adoption, so full speed ahead with Nostr for me. But I think that's actually Polycentric is well worth looking at if you're a Nostr dev. There's a lot of good ideas there that maybe we could incorporate at some point in the future.
Is there any
Um,
core thing to kind of highlight, or something that stands out that might be relevant to people who are thinking about Nostr a lot?
Not off the top of my head. It's just like it's the guy who writes it is really really smart, and he just makes a lot of really intelligent technical applications. Like I'd never heard of a vector clock, so I wouldn't have used a vector clock, but he knew about it, and so
Mm,
he used it in the appropriate location. Um, yeah, I haven't like delved into the architecture that much, so I should take my own advice too.
mm, yeah. And with Futo, is there a charter or a goal with that program? Did you come out of it, and are you intending to turn it into a company, or or start a nonprofit or sort of just continue developing it on your own, or what's sort of the next step?
Yeah, it's pretty informal. It was no strings attached, except it needs to be open source. So Coracle's open source. It was going to be open source anyway, and yeah, so that ended last Friday,
Oh, wow.
or I guess 2 Fridays ago,
Yeah.
and yeah, I guess it'll be longer by the time this podcast goes out. And so
We'll go soon.
yeah. So I'm back to my regular job, but I'm hoping that I can get something going with OpenSats. I looked at starting a business based on Nostr. I actually talked to Max at one point too,
Hmm.
and what I've kind of concluded is that there's not enough. There aren't enough people on Nostr to really make a business out of it. 18,000 weekly active users.
Right.
That's great. That's really good for the time period that we've been in. But, how much do you have to monetize each of those users in order to make a living? It's not insignificant. The unit economics just aren't there yet. Um,
Right.
so, yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I would agree. I think there's probably not enough people to make a business today, but with a lot of technology businesses, I think it's kind of like you can build something before it's big enough, and then by the time it's big enough, then the audience is showing up, and then you can sort of make the business work a bit different, right? So you're kind of like over investing in the future potential, and then when that arrives, you're sort of the person in place instead of starting at that point when there's like a lot of competition. So I wonder, do you think that 18,000, we've been watching it, kind of consistent. Do you think that like, does that worry you, or do you think that there's natural ways that that'll just grow over time as more products get built? Or how do you think about sort of the user numbers and what you'd hope or expect to see to be able to focus more full time on it?
yeah, it kind of is what it is. I feel like I would obviously hope for more adoption, but how that happens or whether that happens is basically just an accident of history at this point. I think Bluesky as a competitor is probably the most germane thing to whether Nostr continues to grow. So far, I read Fiat Jaff's post about that
Yeah.
earlier today. I think it's what Blue Sky is a scam or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I He made a lot of good points that I didn't realize. I do remember reading the Blue Sky white paper 6 months ago, and noticing what he pointed out about the DID provider.
Hmm.
There's just a centralized DID provider, and we haven't solved that problem, but we will someday. That's kind of when I stopped reading about Blue Sky.
Hmm.
It was like this is way too complicated and way too incomplete to bother with.
Right.
Um, so
Did you
yeah,
see Rebel's response to the post,
no, I
to
don't
Fiat
think
Chow's
so.
post? It was pretty good. He was kind of talking about the cathedral versus the bazaar, kind of that idea, and sort of Blue Sky is a little bit of the cathedral style of development, and Nostr is sort of the bazaar style of development.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that makes complete sense. It really feels that way. I mean, Nostr certainly is bizarre.
bizarre, the bizarre. but um, but yeah, I've been playing around and trying to learn a little bit more about AT protocol and Blue Sky. Blue Sky. My impression, and I'm actually curious to hear sort of what you may like or dislike about it. But my impression is that it's really close to Twitter. Like, it hasn't really tried to innovate too much yet. I think there's a bunch of theory or hypothesis around how it could be different, but ultimately it's very, very similar today. Sort of, the B Sky, I think, I think it's called personal data server or something, is kind of like a big glob, and there's this like big world, big graph networking thing, which again feels kind of like it's a centralizing server, and it feels like Nostr maybe, in my view, is like the opposite end of the spectrum of like crazy radical, like everything's just an atomic unit of a message. It's replicated wherever. There's no reliability. Like, it's kind of like a feature of the thing. When things will be available, or when things would be consistent. Um, but but I think it's almost like easier for me to see how you take those kind of radically different atomic building blocks and recompose them into something that like eventually feels a bit more normal for people, versus taking something that starts feeling very normal and then sort of bit by bit kind of encourages enough energy to arrive that people want to build thing X and thing Y and thing Z on it. Kind of the radical nature of it is kind of, I think, what makes Nostr fun and why there's so much developer attention and, so many people building so many things on it. So I wonder, like, is that framing consistent with your experience, or do you have sort of a different way to look at the kind of two?
I have no idea. I think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. But yeah, the DW, what is it? The personal web node stuff. That's kind of the approach that Zion was taking for a long time with bootstrapping with the Lightning Network. That idea has never made much sense to me. It's it's too much like Mastodon. You don't. No one's going to run their own node. If they do, it's going to be using a web like a cloud service, and so they're all going to be essentially centralized anyway. I guess it goes back to that problem I was talking about of switching cost. Is if you ask every user to run a server or to choose a provider for a server, they're going to check the box and then never look back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a very promising architecture. Maybe it is in theory if your Uncle Jim runs your node for you, but storing your own data and maintaining your freedom of speech is pretty high stakes. Um, I guess maybe higher stakes than having financial sovereignty. Like delegating your money to a Uncle Jim Lightning node seems less bad to me, because money is more neutral. But personal data and content is a lot less neutral and
Mm-hmm.
more emotive. No one's looking at your Lightning transactions trying to figure out what you spent your money on and cancel you. That's
Right.
sociopathic behavior.
Yeah. For now.
So, um, yeah, I think the architecture doesn't make a lot of sense from what I know of it. I really don't know that much. I read through the thing 6 months ago and never looked back. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but if I were to try to steelman the Bluesky position, I think it might end up looking a little bit like the topic centric relay idea that you were suggesting earlier, which is, maybe you're not
Mhm.
going to run your own, but there's natural hubs where people would gather that all have something in common, and there's some amount of like it's not fully trusted, but it's like out of convenience people all kind of choose to gather there. And like you could publish in other places too, like you can publish on 10 relays, but there's one relay that's maybe all the people from your church, or maybe there's all the people from Austin, you know maybe a fellowship or program all choose to get together on that relay. And I wonder if really, the Nostr, the wildness, the atomic units of the messages will get recomposed into something that's a little bit like what Bluesky is kind of aiming, or they're sort of doing it that top down way, which doesn't always sit right with me, because it feels like it's sort of designed before we know how it gets used, whereas relays in a sense are so simple. They haven't been, they've been designed to be so simple, but now we might recompose them or constitute them into something that looks kind of like the Bluesky style. So I'm I'm trying to do my best. I think I'm like more I get Nostr more than I get Bluesky, but I'm trying to keep an open mind, because ultimately I don't really care if Nostr wins or Bluesky wins or something else. I care that the principles and the goals of these things make their way into people's hands in a big way. But the specifics of
yeah.
the which protocol it is, I can have an opinion or a belief, but but ultimately I just want to see it work.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I mean, I could see a lot of ways that this could play out. We could share ideas between the two different protocols and learn from one another, and then build two totally separate things, or maybe they'll merge into a single thing. Or I guess the thing that I'm really afraid of is one or the other becoming a new centralized uh, uh, protocol or platform with all the same problems that we already have,
Right.
but marketing itself and capturing that mind share for normal people.
Right.
And if either of them, if either of the two is going to do that, it's going to be Bluesky.
Right.
because it's better known. And like you said, it's more familiar. So that would be the worst case scenario: is no one wins because someone stole the decentralized marketing term.
Right.
Um,
But it seems like we've
but
had a lot of
I mean, we could,
people proposing decentralized, as a marketing term for many years. I've been playing with all kinds of
yeah,
tools that have never really caught my attention the way Nostr has. So I
yeah,
think even if the marketing idea falls flat once people start, you see a lot of this already, I guess, on Blue Skies. A lot of people, are there is a certain, like, I don't know, they call it content moderation or censorship,
was
but
it
there
five
is.
five management or something like
Right.
that?
Vibe management. So, if I think if that happens to maybe it's fine and during a beta period, but if that happens at any great extent, I mean, what do you have besides Twitter all over again, but just a smaller scale version of it?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting the trade-off between Twitter that and Mastodon that people have mentioned. Like the smaller a platform is, the more despotic power
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
administrators have. And so Blue Sky for that reason is way more centralized than Twitter right now.
Hmm.
So if you want to go decentralized, you're basically betting that Blue Sky will become more decentralized over time
Hmm.
by joining there right now. So it's not a solution at all today. Whereas Nostr is actually a solution today. It's a cruddy solution, but it's
Yep.
people are actually using it to get around censorship. So yeah, it's
Right.
interesting. I mean, I don't mind if Blue Sky wins. I just want to win.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think about sort of your go forward? Like you mentioned, you aren't necessarily sure that you want to commit to working in the ecosystem full time, or you haven't found the right place to invest your efforts full time yet. But would there be some is it like a user count or certain sort of traction with certain applications that would make you say now it's time to go all in, or to kind of get conviction? What would it take in your mind?
Oh, I'm already all in. I don't think I can build a business right now, at least
I
not
see.
without a VC's help. I've pitched a few times to VCs, but I've never pitched before, and so my pitches are not really compelling yet. So if any VCs out there want to give me a second chance, let me
Mhm.
know. But I've already talked to my current job, and I'm quitting at the end of May, and I
Oh.
don't have a job lined up.
Oh wow.
So
Okay. So
I
you're going
uh,
all in.
I may be drowning by the end of June. I might eat all my savings, eat all my Bitcoin, but yeah, no, I'm all in.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, I mean, as you're thinking through that, it's certainly worth, trading notes on, what kinds of things you're excited about. I think one of the what I would think are some of the biggest opportunities or the best ways to focus is to find like a niche that's really underserved or that's kind of newly emergent and that is not yet, it's still like there's a lot of questions about how it's going to play out. So some of the stuff we talked about around how our discovery service is going to work, or some of these like media servers and stuff, that stuff, in a sense, a lot of people have built a lot of different clients. And so I don't know if a client pitch on its own is kind of a, one that everybody's going to understand right away is very differentiated.
Right.
But some of these other topics we've addressed, I think, who is it? I think, is it Melvin Carvalho had posted something about micro apps where he listed about 8 or so different micro apps. It almost seems like each of those have the kind of potential that, you get one of them right and you go very deep in a very specific area that you can really, you really develop a lot of depth in service of that ecosystem instead of trying to do like everything all at once, kind of, from a kind of run the best client with the best servers and relays and stuff. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think focus is where it's at. All those things are basically matters of execution. Are you making a really good micro app for the thing that you want and marketing it properly? And then same thing for server side stuff. What is your search relay look like? Is it fast? Is it good? Is it marketed properly? I think marketing is a huge thing. And there's actually an impressive amount of attention for a community of geeks to marketing. I've seen some really nice websites
Mhm.
and some really good like social media marketing. I think people are doing a really good job with that. That's a weak point for me.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's nice that we have a lot of really well-rounded individuals in Nostr. We're really not just a bunch of nerds.
Yeah. I wonder if some of the best marketing comes from being in the telegrams where there's the most activity around the thing you care about. Right. So I've seen some people already make the transition from, I'd say, building very much on their own and building really high quality stuff, but not being very plugged in. And then you sort of, you show up at Nostrica, or, you sort of meet people through telegrams. And then when you're gathered with people, then people understand, like, the people who have other pieces of the puzzle that you need. Maybe they have distribution through a client or a relay, and the micro app you're building actually fits in there. It almost seems like that is, the like being in the right Telegram chats may be a stronger marketing vector than is obvious. And then having a nice website, nice, but ultimately, if you're not connected to the people that you're building with, you sort of, the best website in the world won't be noticed, but the ideas that flow through those people networks really matter.
Yeah, I miss Nostrica, and that's like the greatest regret of my life. I had an expired passport, so I couldn't make it.
Oh
But
yeah.
I'm going to Bitcoin 23, not to go to the Bitcoin conference, but just to go to the like the karaoke night,
Oh,
basically.
nice. You're gonna go to the karaoke night. I love
Oh
it.
yeah, I'm gonna do everything. I'm gonna meet as many Nostriches as I possibly can, uh, and have fun.
That's good. I
That's
can't.
what Nostr is all about. Apparently, is just having fun. So
Yeah, I'm so sad that I can't make it because I love karaoke too. But I guess Nostrasia, right, is I think November. So I'm planning
yeah,
to hit that one.
yeah, I'm hoping to do that too. I've already bought my shirt, so
Perfect.
if all else fails, I have that.
Right. And so you get to the end of May and you're freed up from your full-time work. Do you think you're gonna, how do you prioritize where to focus? Like, do you do more stuff on the existing Coracle kind of product and service, or do you hack around with a bunch of other apps or connect with other people building things, or how do you prioritize? I mean, freedom of all of your time to contribute to Nostr.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but I want to build I want to try NDK first of all,
Mm-hmm.
that Pablo's been working on.
Yeah.
I've created my own infrastructure for writing a client, and it's fine. It's a little snarled. I don't think NDK is going to be the silver bullet yet, at least, but I'm going to build a micro app that is niche focused and use NDK to do that and learn that. I'd also like to contribute as well. So if I'm not happy with NDK, I would like to extract everything that I've done in Coracle out. So one big piece that's missing and is kind of contributed to some controversy over like NIP 94 and stuff is content parsing. No one's written a library to parse text content in a consistent way. And there is this emerging standard coming out where it's like certain subsets of Markdown. So like not links, definitely not links, but bullet points you could parse. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
code blocks because they're human readable still. But Bec32 encoded entities, URL extraction, media previews, and all that kind of stuff. So having a library that's just focused on that, I'd like to. I have a parser. It's like 100 lines. It's nothing fancy. It's actually kind of buggy, but refining that and releasing that so that other people can have a consistent sort of presentation layer. I don't think anyone's done anything like that. So those are the small projects that I want to start out with. Once that's done, I have an idea for a business that could work even now without more Nostr adoption. And so over the last couple months, I've been adding slowly white labeling features to Coracle. So right
Mm-hmm.
now you can specify a color scheme, you can specify a header image, and you can specify a one or more relays that are hard coded. And if you specify relays, it turns off all the relay oriented interface. And so what you can do with that is you can deploy Coracle to your own server and deploy your own relay, connect the two together, and there you go. You have your own private community. You have your own Nostr intranet. Not everything is done there. I don't know if any relay implementations have. Well, I guess NoStream has a pub key whitelist, So I have to connect the pub key whitelist um, like an invite code system in order to onboard people. Uh,
Hmm.
because it's like a chicken and egg thing. You can't onboard someone if you don't have their pub key, or you can't onboard someone if they don't have permission. You can't give them permission if they don't have your pub key, or if you don't have their pub key. So solving that is one of the things I want to do, and that helps me actually like deploy it to my friends and family potentially. Although the
Hmm.
appetite there for Twitter, like private Twitter, is like non-existent. So I might have to go a little farther before I can really make that happen. But
Do you have
the
a use
business
case
model
in
I see.
mind with white labeling Coracle? Like you said that the one that the friends and family one may not be ready for it, but is there one that you think is ready for it?
Yeah, well, I've heard a lot of people talk about disrupting Slack recently, right?
Hmm.
Slack and Microsoft Teams are kind of the incumbents, and they're kind of clunky and boring. And maybe it's time for new solutions to come out. So if you can create, based on this open source Nostr infrastructure, something where you have a like a platform as a service kind of thing, where you say, here's like a hosted Nostr Nostr, like closed Nostr deployment, or semi-closed. Maybe
Hmm.
this relay is open, this relay is closed, and then people can select one between the two of them. And then add white labeling features into other clients.
Yep.
So, create a white labelable Damus app, white labelable Amethyst. Then you can have your like corporate brand sitting on everything, all connected to the same relays. So, and that's an interesting business idea because it doesn't rely on Nostr adoption at all. If Nostr fails, worst case scenario is you have kind of a clunky implementation of this centralized service, but maybe you still have customers, and
Hmm.
that's what matters for a business at the end of the day. So
Right. I wonder when you start talking about Slack, I almost wonder, is there a very simple version of that that's really just like a Telegram replacement? Because I know there's a lot of energy already for just like, why are we still having all of our Nostr discussions on Telegram? Is there a,
yeah,
if you're going to go after that, is there a simple slice of it maybe before going for all the different channels and enterprise features, but like a simple version where you could be like the the Telegram replacement built on Nostr native?
it wouldn't be hard to do, especially if your relay is private. You've got privacy built in, so yeah, it wouldn't be that bad to build something like that. Coracle has a chat feature. It's not very good. It's basically not been maintained since December, but that's one of the things that people like most about Coracle, surprisingly, is that you can do group chat because pretty much everyone else has ignored that. I don't know why, but that's my moat right now.
Mhm. Well, I
um,
mean yeah,
but
that's interesting because if it already touches on a theme that you're excited about, like the broader Slack enterprise thing, if you and I think it's really early to get a lot of developer attention and kind of ecosystem attention because everybody on Nostr uses Telegram, right? So it's kind of a nice way to sort, like we were talking about, like in a sense marketing an idea by being connected to the people who care about the idea and
yeah,
get their buy-in on what features it should have or what kinds of trade-offs they're comfortable with, relative to what you're thinking. You
yeah,
get
and of
that
course we
going, and
do
then that
dog
same
sitting too.
infrastructure could become the Slack thing, right? Just more features on top of that same infrastructure.
Yeah. Do you know about Blowwater?
I don't. What's Blowwater?
It's a chat client. I think it's the closest thing to this so far. It's really nice. It's not all the way there. Sometimes it doesn't load metadata. It's blowwater.deno.dev, Deno. I think it's really good. I
D
would
L
really,
O
what I'd really
W.
like to do is to like just link the chat item in Coracle to Blowwater whenever it's ready, and get rid of my chat stuff. I'm hesitant to do that because I know people like it, but eventually I'd like to, maybe even embed that as a micro app.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like chat is something that everybody wants and nobody really focuses on. So I think you're right that it feels like it has kind of a micro app opportunity to for somebody to do it well. And I think it does have, it's kind of inconsistent in a sense with the goals of Nostr is so much
Yeah.
about, you know, about reducing the ability to suppress speech and like private chat is not that, but maybe that actually creates the opportunity because if you want to focus on that and it has different types of relays and these private things, maybe there's some default paid component, but it's so focused and everybody wants it. everybody just plug your stuff in, and you can get a lot of uh, a lot of early adoption from just being like a really good version of this really important thing that nobody else is focused on.
Yeah, that's kind of how I sell it to myself is like, well, great. Yeah, I'm creating a private centralized service. Good. But it's interoperable. So at
Right.
any point when Nostr takes off, you can just say, hey, you know what? You can press this button and you can talk to the entire internet through the same exact client that's branded. Or you could partner with another company for like some project that you guys are collaborating on and then create a disposable relay for that project that you talk over, and then you just throw away the infrastructure when you're done. I think there's a lot of ways that you could sort of introduce people to Nostr using this centralized thing. So you get the concepts of relays and pub keys out of the way, and introduce people to those in a situation that they're comfortable with, and then you say, well, you can use the same identity for your public social media.
Yeah, it touches on the theme that you were talking about, trying to onboard people to a more Facebook-like experience.
Mhm.
In a sense, a simple chat experience is kind of Facebook groups like in many ways, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I've already seen this vision start to happen. There are two clients out there that are based on Coracle forks already. There's nostrkid.com, I think, and then I can't remember the name of the other one, but it's the topic browsing client. Um, I think most people have a dark theme, and the dark theme is broken.
Hmm.
So maybe you know what I'm talking about, but
I know
it's
that most
exciting
people
to
have a
see my
dark
work already
theme.
like sort of spiral out of my control. It's awesome.
Yeah. What's the dark theme problem? Just that everybody's
Oh yeah,
everybody
so
chooses to make it dark.
I think people's system defaults are often dark, but for whatever reason, the default for me and some other people was dark rather than the light theme. They probably defined the light theme in the environment variables, and
Mm,
then everyone's loading it, and it's like black on black text
I see.
or black text on black background.
Right. Full cypherpunk.
Yeah, but it's easy enough to fix.
Right, right. That's cool. That's cool. And then I know I was looking at your discussion on some of your blog. You were talking about the source control idea, that was one that at least you've kind of stumbled around in your mind. Is that something that you would think about working on full time, or is that sort of still in definition phase in your mind?
Like the Git bounty.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what I said on that blog post was that the first one that I put out there.
It was one of them where you were talking about not trying to be the centralized repository of code, but kind of more the messaging around, raising, PRs and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that blog post was about the CAP theorem, which is kind of one way to talk about databases. You got consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, and what Nostr doesn't have is consistency. But you can add consistency by removing by trading off the other capabilities and basically say I'm only going to talk to this one relay. Now you get consistency. That's good. You lose everything else. So there's these trade-offs, and for for things other than broadcast social media, consistency is more or less a requirement.
Hmm.
For I could see a lack of consistency being a problem for uh, like collaborative work sort of situations where you need a high level of clarity and a low level of latency. So like I'm sure you've experienced direct messages on Nostr just sometimes not happening.
Yep.
uh, direct messages is that sort of situation where consistency is required, or if not required, then highly desired. So maybe in the future you would choose a single relay, you'd broker with, or you'd kind of negotiate with the person you're talking to say like, let's have our conversation here and here,
Hmm.
rather than just like spraying your messages and hoping there's an intersection of online relays that you both talk to. Um, so yeah, for the GitHub replacement, that's not something I'm really interested in working on. It's it in my opinion, I think it's a fool's errand. I think the non-social stuff that Pablo is working on is are really interesting. Highlighter is really neat, and I love I think Zapit.live is the other site.
Right.
That stuff
Yeah.
is awesome, and it's really cool because it is essentially social, but it's not social in the way that we think about it.
Right.
So I think low consistency broadcast kind of social niche is where Nostr excels, and stepping outside of that is kind of using a hammer when you want to drill a screw in.
Yep, yep, yep. Well, I mean, I like your observation though that some of these other types of tools make it keep people comfortable with this identity system, and then they can really easily plug their identity system in to kind of the kind of the feed centric system. So obviously, lots of trade offs and and stuff to consider. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's a fun ecosystem. So.
it
And it
is.
sounds like you're in a lot of transition right now, so it'll be fun. We should keep in touch, and I want to hear more about as you're thinking through what you're working on and stuff. Keep me in the loop because
Yeah,
yeah.
and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention OpenSats.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean that's what I really hope I can get a hold of. I submitted my application I think in January, so they have a
Hmm.
really old version of my application. I'm just working on it part time. I don't know what's going to happen. So I've freshened that up, but hopefully that pans out. Uh,
So you submitted a new version.
yeah, I submitted a new application to OpenSats. So with $5 million to go around, I hope maybe I can get a part of that. That
Yeah.
would solve a lot of my problems.
Have they talked much about what the kind of distribution criteria or funding criteria is for the OpenSats project?
I think they're still figuring that out. Sounds like they're maybe a little bit behind the ball, and like they've got a whole giant flood of applications, which is not surprising.
Right. Mhm. That's cool. But yeah, it's I think as you're sort of going in full time, I think there'll be you'll be learning a lot things a lot faster than when you're just doing part time. So it'll be
Yeah,
fun to stay in touch and keep hearing about kind of your updates and your thinking and how it's going.
yeah, for sure, will do.
Cool. Well, this has been fun. Thanks for taking the time to spend with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate your questions. I think you're an awesome interviewer, so
Oh,
I really
thanks so
enjoyed
much.
talking.